This is not a typical Pentecost sermon. Sorry if you were waiting for tongues of fire coming down, because this is sort of a different way to think about the future of the church. You know how some birthdays you look back and you go, wow, that was great. And some birthdays, it's all about looking forward. What I can do now that I couldn't do yesterday. And in particular, looking forward to the future of the church, as Mark Twain might have said, rumors of its death are greatly exaggerated. It's not dying, but it's undergoing a seismic shift. We've been looking at the changes in the church now for some time at College Heights. Goes back to that Saturday retreat with Robert, which now is, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, with the panel of 30 somethings. Remember, we wanted to ask them, well, if you don't go to church, what do you do? And we got back from Kim Ladd, you have to understand, when we work so hard all week, our weekends are sacred. And she meant it, and it was amusing. I mean, it was. We were trying to see into the future, and the crystal ball looked cloudy. And then came COVID-19, and we're all just tossed unceremoniously into the deep end of the pool, and we discovered online church, whether we wanted to or not. For a small, highly participative group like College Heights, Zoom seemed like the best solution. And, you know, after we found our links and learned how to raise our hands and mute and unmute ourselves, this is just how we do church now. It may be virtual church, but virtual doesn't mean it's not real. It just means it's not physical. We're still here. We're still talking and praying and caring and listening to each other and being church as we understand it. As some folks have been saying, our church has been open the whole time. It's just our building that's closed. And you can probably name the big losses, right? There are no hugs. I mean, we get music, but it's not that full-throated singing together that we're used to. But there are definitely wins. You know, people we haven't seen in ages can come to church now. You don't have to get in your car on Sunday morning. If you turn your video off, you can even come to church in your jammies. Nobody would know. But almost best of all, it's like we've broken the ice into the online world. I'm willing to bet we never would have tried an experiment like church on Zoom if we hadn't been forced to do it. But look at us, we are doing it, right? And now it's one more tool we have to create our future. So let's do an imagination exercise. We still do have to figure out the specifics of when and how we can come back into the building. But we'll talk, we'll figure it out. We have time because it's not going to be for a while. This morning, I want to go beyond that decision and think about what church could look like when we're all back together again. Because it won't be just like going back to everything we had before. This experience on Zoom has changed us. We're not the same as we were before. In particular, I've been changed. I feel like I've visited Wonderland. I've spent the last 10 weeks down this rabbit hole called online church, and it's pretty interesting. I've been zooming around, meeting people with titles like digital minister, right? Ordained ministers whose entire operation is online. That's the role they play in their church's clergy staff. I've been listening to church podcasts of everything from sermons, which is pretty normal, but there are churches that have online daily centering prayer. Like Jan used to have organized back in the Pine Room. You can find an audio version of that with a different, slightly different message and slightly different music and scripture and so forth, recorded out there, different one every day, from all kinds of churches. I've zoomed into other people's Taizé services, and I've live streamed a mass, and I've listened to virtual choirs like you just heard our joint choir do. I visited, there's an Episcopalian seminary back east with an entire branch on E formation. Okay, E is the electronic, right? An entire set of offerings on how to do digital ministry. When I was at PSR 20 years ago, there was not a breath of any of that. It was simply assumed you would be in a building, in a room with people in person. So through all of that, I've had kind of a filter in place that would go, not us, not us. Interesting, make a note, not us. Whoa, I didn't know you could do that. Make a note, not us, not us. Because a lot of the stuff that people are doing seems like it wouldn't translate into our environment very well. So let me give you an example. There are many churches that are handling shelter in place by doing pre-recorded worship services. So during the week, the pastor will go into an empty sanctuary in robes and whatever other props they need and record their sermon. And the music minister does a virtual choir thing. Every week, Peter, every week, you do a virtual choir anthem, right? And somebody pre-records a children's message and somebody else pre-records an offering pitch. And then by, Friday night or Saturday, somebody else stitches it all together in a movie editing software environment and add labels and color banners and, get it all spiffy. And then you release it to Facebook Live or to YouTube Premiere for a specific time on Sunday morning, like say 10 o'clock Sunday morning. And 10 o'clock Sunday morning, basically it's like watch parties, right? People get on to the right channel on YouTube or the right Facebook group, and up pops their church service. If you're on Facebook Live, you can comment in the chat box. If you're on YouTube, they give you a link to come over to Facebook Live so you can comment in the chat box. And then after the service, they very often have their coffee hour on Zoom so people can talk to each other. When you do a worship service that way, it's essentially like watching a movie. Somebody has really thoughtfully put the whole thing together so it flows, edited out the bloopers, and made it look, nice. I mean, it's a production. But I look at that and I go, wow. Well, first of all, we don't have the staff or the technology or the money to do that every single week. But I think about us watching a movie instead of a church service that you would contribute to mid-service, with your voice. And I put that in the not us column. But a lot of churches are doing it, and you can get out on Facebook, on their Facebook group or on YouTube and watch them. It's very educational. A lot of stuff is available now without having to leave home. But through all of these Zoom meetings and the webinars and the clergy tearing their hair out, I keep hearing people say two things. They say the internet is the new public square, and they say go where the people are. And I watch folks, or I listen to folks report, yeah, we put up a worship service and man, by Tuesday we had 500 people watched our church service. Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. the gut reaction I had, it's not an exegesis from the mind thing, but the gut reaction is that Bible passage that Pepe read. It's like if you're fishing on that side of the boat, there are a lot of fish over there. A lot of people, admittedly mostly younger than us, are very, very comfortable in the online world in ways that we are not. And they've, right now, there is a lot of stuff out there for them to look at. Let me give you an analogy to what I think is happening in the church. We'll see during talkback if you agree with me. But this sort of, this helped me think about our situation. You might remember maybe, 15 years or so ago, when e-readers started to become popular, the Kindles and the Nooks and the rest of the stuff. And it was, it was kind of spiffy, man. You could take an e-reader on an airplane with 3 novels loaded on it, and you could get to Australia with that thing. It was great. There were widespread predictions that the paper book publishing industry was on its way out. Paper books were going to be like slide rules. I mean, who would buy a paper book if you could get a digital copy, which was cheaper, didn't require any shelf space, and didn't have to be dusted, right? I mean, it just made perfect sense. And then 15 years later, if you look at what has actually happened, the paper book publishing industry is doing just fine. And a lot of reading is happening on e-readers. So it didn't mean that the industry went under, but the menu of options for how people could receive the content of a book expanded, right? The menu used to be big choice between hardcover and paperback. Well, now you can get print on demand, you can get digital, you can get audio, the menu between the author content creation and you, the reader, listener, absorber, that menu just expanded. And none of the old options went away. Okay, so what if the same kind of thing is happening with church? That is, people have been predicting the demise of church now for a while. What's really happening is that it's changing again. It's changed before. What I have discovered in the last 10 weeks of all this Wonderland traveling is that the menu of options for how people choose to receive their spiritual nourishment, the menu is expanding. It used to be there was one choice. You'd go to church. You want to go to church? Go. You can do it so many ways now. It really does make you want to stop and think a bit. And I don't have answers for you this morning. I'm broaching this topic because we've never thought about our future quite this way. Now, it's certainly true when we're back in the building, that's always going to be the main modality for how we gather. I mean, it's the only way to get a hug. It's the only way to sing together. Yeah, the first Sunday, I'm sorry, we're just going to have to do nothing but singing, all right? I got this like major big reservoir that is empty now, and I'm going to have to fill it up.
Approved.
But from all that we are learning in this time of being together in other ways, what are we going to do with all of that learning? So these are just a couple questions to think about. We don't have to answer them anytime soon. But it's a direction that I said is a little bit different than what we have pondered before. I mean, at the very least, we ought to ask ourselves the question, how do we want to show up on that menu of options? How does College Heights want to be present in the online world? We're very small. We don't have a lot of, financial resources to go do wild and crazy things. So we got to be judicious in our choices. But even within those constraints, we can think about this in some new and different ways. Here's another question. What does it mean for the church to have members who are not local, right? We're going to receive new members in a few minutes, and one of them is Jay, and Jay lives in North Carolina. Well, it totally makes sense for Jay to be a member of the church because she used to live here and she's been heart connected to this community for years. Still, most of the time she's far away from us. So what does it mean for her to participate in the church and for us to care for and support her the way we do for each other? She's going to help us figure this out. I think the timing of having her join the church while we're thinking about online stuff is astonishing. It's just great. What people are starting to realize now is that you can have a church that is what they call non-geographic, meaning it's no longer defined by, I live within driving distance of the building where this church meets. It's a bigger way to think about it. What would it mean to have a hybrid church? Meaning you still have something like a Zoom presence in an in-person worship service. And I know Peter has some different ideas about how we could organize this, but there are a lot of people having had Zoom experiences that don't want to let go of them when they come back into their buildings. That could be exciting too, because Zooming isn't just for people like Jay who live far away. It's for people like Jan who have trouble some days getting up and getting into her car and getting over to church. And she misses us being stuck at home, right? If we had Zoom, I mean, there are many possibilities we should be thinking about. That's called a hybrid church, or at least that's the term that I've heard people use. And as long as we're thinking about having some ongoing online presence in worship, we should take a few minutes, maybe in worship and arts, and talk about what it means to do our sacraments and our sacred rituals in an online space. We've done communion. We'll be doing communion next Sunday. You bring your own elements, your own food and drink, and celebrate it at home. But we're just getting started. I mean, how do you do an online baptism? There's some very interesting questions in these because it's important to distinguish how you feel, what you believe about the outer form of a sacrament or a ritual. For some people, and I'm not saying this is not a judgment, this is just how they feel. The outer form is extremely important. I mean, when this whole COVID thing got started, there were Anglicans who take communion, from a common chalice, who simply didn't want to have communion if they couldn't do it the way they were used to doing it. So there was something about that outer form that was deeply important to them. We should talk about how the outer form of our rituals plays into our own interpretation of them. My personal feeling, but this is just me, and College Heights, the whole point is to have, your own thoughtful response to these kind of questions. My own feeling is that the meaning of a ritual really lives inside of you. And while it's a connection to it represents a connection to the past, it's a connection that's more like a bungee cord. So if you got to stretch it and you got to move it, yeah, keep the internal meaning the same. And if you need to change the outer form of it, you're still connected. It still means what it meant to you before. That might not be true for everybody. I shouldn't assume that it is. There isn't anything I can do about communion right now, short of driving over to your house and leaving it on the front porch. But you, that's there's just some really interesting questions. The point is, these changes are happening anyway, and all that COVID has done for us, a group like us, who, with the exception of the Doyles, who are, closer in age to the online generation, it's made us very, very aware of how the rest of the world has been living for a while, which is very digitally connected. It's totally normal to have a screen in your hand, and that's how you interact with the world. We have some stuff to learn here. This is good. This is good. So that's basically what I wanted to leave you with on this Pentecost birthday, is this idea that the future is rich. It's rich. And we can participate in it in more ways than we perhaps thought. We have done, again, the timing is marvelous. We did the work with Jason last year about our identity piece, right? And we came up with that wonderful statement of why we gather. As long as whatever we decide to do in the future, we are still creating welcoming, spirit-filled places. You notice it didn't say it had to be in the building. Welcoming, spirit-filled places of empowering generosity, so that all may safely find their voice and be inspired to transform the world. As long as you can see that why statement in whatever we do in the future, we are still recognizably College Heights, and we are still offering our gifts to the world. So the invitation is to continue the legacy that we have been given, the legacy of openness and tolerance, and passion for spiritual justice, and companions on the journey of self-discovery, and all the things that have drawn us to make this little community. If we want to extend that legacy into the future, we need to move in the direction of the future. We need to be willing to fish on the other side of the boat. So, those are some thoughts. Tell me what you think, and you're going to need to unmute yourselves, because I can't do it in this version of Zoom.